How to use your hand gestures to articulate a point. Now, 55% of our communication is attributed to our body language. So how do you not just rely on articulating your words, but also on how do you deliver those words effectively? We spent the past 5 years training professionals from all over the world become more articulate, and one of the key areas we focus on is their body language, which is often an overlooked part of overall communication. But understanding these techniques will not only help us come across as a lot more confident, but help us articulate our messages in a much more memorable manner. So we're going to get into 3 common hand gestures to instantly elevate your body language, what to do with your hands when you are not using gestures, and how to practice these techniques to use them reliably. By the way, if you're new here, my name is Radeep from Frantically Speaking. We release communications content regularly, so if you're into that, hit subscribe. And if you want to take your skills to the next level, you can click the link in the description to see if we can work together. Okay, so the first thing we're going to get into is 3 common hand gestures that you can start applying instantly. The thing with gestures is that we tend to use them without much consciousness. So if we can understand reliable gestures, we can then reliably use them without overusing them. So let's get into it.
The first one is the chop. Now the chop is exactly what it sounds like. You take both your arms and you chop them forward. That's about it. I'm just going to lower the camera a little more. Yeah, there we go. Now, the chop is utilized for emphasizing on a particular point. Let's look at some examples. Take this sentence. I love going for hikes. I love going for hikes. I can just tell you that, hey, I love going for hikes. But now imagine I add a chop to highlight the word love. So instead of just saying, I love going for hikes, I can say, I love going for hikes. Notice how my hands did the gesture and ended back into the steeple pose very seamlessly. You don't have to necessarily keep your hands like this. You can also keep them like this. Doesn't really matter. Don't get too caught up in the little technicalities of things. Let's look at another example. This is the final decision. I can just say that this is the final decision. Instead, I can highlight the word final with a chop. This is the final decision. Notice the difference? Let's look at a third and final example. We have to cut costs immediately. We have to cut costs immediately. When you utilize the gesture, it helps to highlight the urgency or the importance of your particular point. And when you do that, people are going to take you a lot more seriously as opposed to saying, we have to cut costs immediately. That's the difference. Let's move on to gesture number 2. This is the comparison gesture. It's one of my favorite gestures to utilize. And the way it works is when we are talking about 2 things, we can utilize this particular gesture. The way it works is, I like this, but I don't like that. For instance, I like cats, but I don't like dogs. As easy as that. The reason we utilize this gesture is to help the audience or our listener navigate through the things that we are talking about. For instance, let's say I'm giving a class on public speaking and I'm talking about 2 students who you have no idea about. So instead of saying, we have 2 speakers with us today, Sanjay and Rashi. Sanjay has an approachable tonality with a very pleasant voice. Rashi has a powerful presence because of her commanding body language. Instead, I can use the comparison gesture. We have 2 speakers with us today, Sanjay and Rashi. Sanjay has an approachable tonality with a pleasant voice. Rashi has a powerful presence due to her commanding body language. Now what I've done is, I've made Sanjay into this hand and Rashi into this hand, so that when I'm utilizing my gestures, the audience is subconsciously navigating. Okay, when he puts his right hand up, he's talking about Sanjay, left hand up, he's talking about Rashi. And that makes it a little easier for them to comprehend and navigate your speech or presentation without them having to know who Sanjay and Rashi are in the first place. This can apply to technical concepts, it can apply to meetings, interviews, anything. But tend to utilize the gesture, this or that. A couple of more examples over here. Today we're going to be addressing the achievements of last year and the challenges of this year. Today we're going to be addressing the achievements of last year and the challenges of this year. One final example. We have 2 points to cover in today's meeting, the budget and its allocation. We have 2 points to cover in today's meeting, the budget and its allocation. That's the comparison gesture. Let's move on to the next one.
This is the you and me gesture. They're 2 different gestures, but they can kind of go hand in hand. It simply means when you address somebody else, you use the you gesture, and when you address yourself, you address the you use the me gesture. The way this looks is, let's say if you're addressing somebody with the word you itself, you want to point to them. Now keep in mind, when you're pointing to somebody else or yourself, you don't want to do this in most cases. Instead, you want to do this, the 5-finger point. It's much better and it looks a lot less intimidating. So you want to point to somebody like this, and you want to point to yourself like this as well. A couple of examples over here are as follows. There are so many problems with this document. Didn't you notice any of them? There are so many problems with this document. Didn't you notice any of them? Or, this single book completely changed my life. This single book completely changed my life. So feel free to play around with each of these gestures, and this one is something that you can incorporate a lot more in your life. Just make sure you don't use it all the time, because the word you comes out very often. So if I keep using the word you every time I address you, it'll look weird. So once every now and then is good enough. So use them through good judgment, and it'll allow you to use your gestures with more precision and better body language. But beyond gestures, we also need to understand the correct stance and posture.
So, how should you stand? A lot of people think that a good way to, if you can't do any of this, a good way to stand is just to put your hands by your side. You just have your hands dangling down there. Now, this can be a little awkward for those of us who don't have enough stage experience, because the hands are just wondering, hey, what am I supposed to do? And then what we might end up doing is we might just leave our hands down there itself, or we might utilize certain gestures over and over again because we don't know what else to do with our hands. Instead, the best posture to have is called the steeple, which looks like this. Very simple. It's on the screen as well, but you take both your palms, connect the fingers, and you keep them joined. Now, you want to avoid doing this. This is like a villain pose that a lot of people do. Instead, when you're speaking, just like the image shows, you want to keep your hands near your belly area itself, communicate, use your gestures, and then come right back. It allows you to have a lot more nimble gesticulation and makes you come across as professional as opposed to dangling.
And finally, how do you practice these techniques reliably? There's a very simple way to do it. It just requires some amount of discipline on your end, and there are different levels to it to make it more and more difficult. The easiest way to start is simply put on your video camera. If you don't want to video record yourself using a phone because you might not have a tripod or whatever, just open Zoom, hit record, and start speaking on it with your camera on. When you're speaking, ensure that you're standing up and have a stopwatch with you. You need to speak for a minimum of 30 seconds. Initially, you want to start by just introducing yourself. That's all. Now you can introduce yourself, talk about your personal life, your hobbies, your work, your passions, your geography, and your family. Very simple. And the first time you speak, forget about gestures, forget about steeple, all of that. Just speak. After you're done, you need to watch that recording to understand moments where you could have utilized any of the 3 gestures we discussed. Once you do that, you need to re-record yourself. You can repeat pretty much the same thing that you said, but try to incorporate at least one, if not all 3 of those gestures. Keep on repeating the same topic, which is your introduction, until you can seamlessly utilize all 3 gestures. So an example of this would be, if I am introducing myself, I would say, without any gestures, hey, my name is Hardeep from Frantically Speaking. I'm very passionate about communication development, and I spend most of my time working with professionals on developing their speaking or working on my own communication skills. Now, if I were to use the 3 gestures discussed, I would then repeat the same statements like this. Hey, my name is Hardeep from Frantically Speaking. I'm very passionate about communication development, and I spend most of my time working with professionals on developing their speaking or on working on my own communication skills. So we started with the me gesture, with the chop, and then the comparison. If you notice, the gestures are not done in a very exaggerated manner. They're just done simply, which help to communicate the point non-verbally as well. After you can comfortably introduce yourself, you need to then go on to impromptu speaking topics. The way to get those topics is simply go to ChatGPT and say, hey, give me 10 one-minute speech topics on blank industry, and just fill in the blank with whatever industry you find to be the most fascinating or relevant to your life. Keep speaking on each topic and fitting in these different gestures. And if you want a reliable platform to practice on, you can contact us and we can talk about working together. But if you're not done watching these videos and want to understand how to combine body language with effective voice modulation as well, I highly recommend you check out this video right here.